The wind howled outside of Pete's Gas and Go like a pack of wolves fighting over roadkill. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their pale glow reflecting off the endless white beyond the windows. I'd been working nights long enough to know that blizzards brought out the weird ones, but this shift was already testing my 3 cardinal rules. I wasn't supposed to be working that night. My coworker Marcus had called in with some excuse about his car not working. We both knew he just didn't want to brave the storm. I didn't blame him. The weather report had called for 8 to 12 inches, but looking at the way the snow was already drifting against the glass doors, it was clear they underestimated. Yet again. The rules weren't officially policy or anything like that. They were passed down from Dave, the previous night shift guy who'd worked here 15 years before moving to Florida. "Keep these in mind," he told me during my training, his face unusually serious, "and you'll be fine." He'd never explained why these particular rules mattered, and I hadn't asked. Something about the way his hand shook when he wrote them down told me that I didn't want to know. Dave had his own story about why he left, though he never told it the same way twice. The version I believed most went like this. One night, during the worst storm of 19, he dozed off for just a minute. When he woke up, all the clocks in the store were showing different times, spanning exactly 100 years, from 1922 to 2022. The security footage later showed him sleeping for exactly 7 minutes, but he swore he remembered living through every single one of those 100 years, watching the store change and stay exactly the same all at once. I'd laughed it off at the time. I mean, David was full of stories about the lady who came in speaking backwards, about the kid who paid entirely in coins from the 1800s, about the dog that walked in on its hind legs wearing a tie. But now, watching the snow pile up against the windows like it was trying to bury us alive, those stories didn't seem so funny. So, my 3 cardinal rules, left by David. Thanks, Dave. 1. Never comment on what people buy. 2. Don't look too long at anyone's reflection in the security mirrors. 3. Always keep the coffee pot full, even if nobody's drinking it. That's simple enough, right? Usually. That'll be $47.82, I told the woman, frantically stuffing bread and milk into her reusable grocery bags. You preparing for the apocalypse, or we just making French toast tonight? She didn't respond. We get all kinds of storm preppers. Bread and milk, though? I'll never understand it. The blizzard transformed the store's windows into frames of static, like old TV screens searching for a signal. Outside, the gas price signs' red LEDs burned through the white chaos like warning beacons, their glow reflecting off the swirling snow in ways that sometimes made me see things that couldn't be there. Faces or figures or forms. It was probably all in my mind. It kept me busy during my late hours. A teenager trudged in around midnight, his hoodie crusted with snow, skateboard tucked under one arm despite the weather. "Whew, rough night for skating, huh?" I said, watching him shake off like a wet dog. "Nah, man, it's best night for it," he replied, grinning as he grabbed a Red Bull and a bag of Doritos. "There's no cops out to hassle you about property damage." His smile faltered slightly as he glanced at the security mirror, then quickly looked away. "And besides, I only live like 2 blocks that way." He pointed vaguely east, toward nothing but empty fields and abandoned construction sites. I knew for a fact there weren't any houses for miles in that direction. But the night got stranger. Around 1 a.m., a woman in a wedding dress stumbled in, mascara streaked down her face, bare feet blue from the cold. She didn't say a word, just walked straight to the coffee machine and poured herself a cup. It was black, no sugar, no cream. "Rough night?" I ventured, breaking rule number 1 again. She turned to me, coffee cup trembling in her hands, and opened her mouth as if to speak. Instead of words, a sound like radio static came out, and for a split second, I swore I could see snowflakes falling from her lips. She left the coffee untouched on the counter, a perfect lipstick print on the rim. When I went to clean it up a few minutes later after she left, the coffee inside was frozen solid, despite the steam I'd seen rising from it earlier. The wedding dress incident rattled me enough that I called my girlfriend, Lucy, just to hear a normal voice. She picked up on the 3rd ring, groggy but concerned. "Is everything okay? It's like 2 a.m. "Yeah, it's just a weird night. Storm's getting bad." There was a strange static on the line, and for a moment, I heard what sounded like my own voice coming through the receiver, having a completely different conversation. Something about finding tracks in the snow that went in circles, endless circles, never leading anywhere. "Hello?" Lucy's voice cut back in. You're breaking up. Did you say something about tracks?" I hadn't. "Never mind," I said quickly. "Go back to sleep. I love you." The security camera feed showing the phone area flickered as I hung up. In the split second between frames, I saw myself still on the phone, but it wasn't Lucy on the other end. The figure on the screen was talking to someone, or something, that made the air around the phone booth frost over, crystal patterns spreading across the glass like hungry vines. He left before I could say anything else, the door chimes jingling in his wake. I never saw him on the cameras leaving the parking lot, though. The automatic doors wheezed open every hour or so, letting in angry swirls of snow and increasingly desperate customers. The smokers were the worst. They'd brave certain death just to get their fix. One guy came in looking like Jack Nicholson at the end of The Shining, frost coating his eyebrows, just to buy a pack of Marlboros. "You know these things will kill you," I said, scanning the barcode. "Yeah," he panted, "but the weather will do it faster." The night shift plays tricks on your mind. The humming fluorescence, the endless loops of soft rock radio, the way time seems to stretch like taffy between customers. I started this job 6 months ago after dropping out of community college, telling myself it was just temporary. Just until I figured things out, but there's something about this place that gets its hooks in you. I'd seen plenty of strange things during my tenure. Tweakers having conversations with the beef jerky display. A woman who came in every Tuesday at 3 a.m. to buy exactly 7 green apples and nothing else. A guy who swore he was from the year 1985 and seemed genuinely shocked by the price of cigarettes. But nothing had prepared me for what was about to walk through that door tonight. The storm was getting worse. The wind had picked up a rhythm, a sort of hollow moaning that sounded almost like words. I tried drowning it out by turning up the radio, but the signal kept cutting out, replaced by what sounded like an old numbers station broadcast. Just a monotone voice, reading out sequences of digits that made my teeth ache. The security cameras were acting up too. Every few minutes, they'd show glimpses of a store I didn't recognize. Older fixtures, different products on the shelves, people in clothes from another era. I blamed it on the interfaces from the storm, but part of me wondered if I was seeing what Dave had seen that night. What he referred to as little peeks through the thin spots in time. I always thought Dave was full of shit. But then the lottery ticket machine started printing receipts on its own, long strings of numbers that, when I lined them up, looked like coordinates. I Google mapped them once, during a slow moment, and they all pointed to places where people had gone missing during blizzards, spanning back to when the store first opened in 1952. I looked into the store's history once as well, during a particularly slow shift. Pete's Gas and Go wasn't always Pete's. As with most businesses, it had gone through 7 different owners since 1952, each selling to the next for a mysteriously low price. The only constant was the building itself, squatting here at the crossroads like a spider in its web. Local legends said it was built on the site of an old stagecoach stop where travelers would seek shelter from winter storms. Not all of them made it out when the weather cleared. Now, previous owners had tried renovating a few times, but the building seemed to resist change. New paint would peel within days, revealing the original colors underneath. Modern security systems would malfunction in specific ways, cameras rotating to stare at empty corners or motion sensors for no reason at all. The last owner, before Pete, had tried to expand the store, but the construction crew quit after finding skeletal remains under the new construction. Between customers, I'd been killing time by arranging the beef jerky pallets to spell out crude words. My small rebellion against retail monotony. The store owner would probably see it on the cameras later, but hey, night shift entertainment comes at a premium. One of the more interesting customers of the night came in about 2 a.m. Now picture Santa Claus if he'd lost his job, developed a severe depression, and started living under a bridge. Or maybe under something worse. His beard was so long it reached his chest, and every hair was rimmed with ice, crackling softly when he moved his head. Snow caked his ancient wool coat, but it didn't seem to melt, like he'd been walking through the storm for hours. Maybe days, maybe centuries. He shuffled to the candy aisle, grabbed the cherry dum-dum lollipop, and placed it on the counter without a word. His eyes never met mine. They never met anything. They just kind of drifted, like 2 pale moons looking for a place to set. After he left, I noticed something odd about the lollipop wrapper in the trash can. The paper was covered in tiny symbols that looked like Sanskrit or something. Definitely not the usual ingredient list and barcode. When I blinked, they were gone, replaced by normal text. I blamed it on eye strain and too much caffeine. The temperature in the store dropped noticeably between his visits, though. I checked the thermostat twice. It stayed steady at 72 degrees, even as my breath started to fog in front of my face. The lights flickered more frequently, too, and the radio started picking up fragments of what sounded like old-time gospel music between songs, though it was too distorted to make out the words. And between his appearances, I tried to keep busy. I reorganized the snack aisle, restocked the coolers, anything to keep my mind off the way the shadows seemed to be growing longer, stretching across the floor like fingers reaching for my feet. The security mirror above Register 3 had started to ripple like water whenever I looked at it, so I made sure to keep my eyes down. A trucker came in about 2:45, looking for coffee and directions to the interstate. As I was explaining the best route, considering the weather, I noticed something odd about his reflection in the window behind him. It wasn't moving quite in sync with him, and his mouth was forming different words than what he was saying. I broke rule number 2 just then, and I stared at it for too long. The reflection noticed me, noticing, and smiled a wide, awful smile that the real trucker wasn't making. I quickly looked away, but not before I saw its teeth, all of them sharp and gleaming like icicles. The trucker left, oblivious to what I'd seen. I watched him climb into his rig and pull out onto the highway. The tracks his tires left in the snow filled in unnaturally fast, like the storm was erasing any evidence he'd ever been there. At 3:15 a.m. the power flickered, just once, but long enough for the darkness to feel alive. In that brief moment of blackness, I heard something scuttling across the ceiling, and what sounded like children laughing from somewhere in the stockroom. When the lights came back on, all the products in aisle 3 had been turned to face the wall, their labels pressed against the shelves like they were hiding their faces. The coffee in the pot had turned to a thick black sludge that smelled like wet earth and old pennies. When I tried to pour it out, it moved wrong, flowing upward instead of down, defying gravity until I slammed the pot down and backed away. Rule 3 suddenly made a lot more sense. Whatever that liquid was, it wasn't coffee anymore, and it wasn't meant to be disturbed. The clock on the wall started running backwards, its second hand ticking counterclockwise with a sound like cracking ice. The temperature dropped so low that the freezer section, paradoxically, began to fog up with warmth. Through the glass doors, the frozen pizzas and ice cream cartons seemed to pulse with a faint, sickly light. Now, an hour later, depressed Santa Claus was back. Same routine, but a different flavored dum-dum. By his third visit, I was starting to question my sanity. The security cameras showed him entering and leaving, but never showed where he went after that. You see, the parking lot was empty, except for my beat-up Civic, and the nearest building was 5 miles away. Now, the fourth time, I broke rule number 1. "Sweet tooth acting up, huh?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady as he placed another lollipop on the counter. Grape this time. The most disgusting of all flavors. I did some digging after that last episode with depressed Santa Claus. I googled Reddit to see if the place had any posts about its history, and it showed a pattern I wish I hadn't noticed. You see, every 3¼ years, just like clockwork, someone would disappear from Pete's Gas and Go during the worst storm of the year. Always on a night shift, always during a blizzard or a similar condition, and always when the temperature dropped low enough to freeze breath in the air. The missing people were all of different ages, different genders, different stories, but they all had one thing in common. They were last seen buying a dum-dum lollipop. The security footage, when it existed, always showed them leaving the store. Never showed where they went after that. The really unsettling part, though, in each case, exactly 1 year after their disappearance, someone would find their driver's license, or wallet even, or purse, perfectly preserved in a block of ice, sitting in the center of the candy aisle. There's no fingerprints, there's no signs of tampering, just a frozen block of memories of people who walked into the storm and never walked out. And depressed Santa Claus, before he left, lifted his head slowly, like a rusty door hinge creaking open. His eyes finally met mine, and I understood why he'd kept them down before. They were the same color as the storm outside, a white so bright that it hurt to look at, with pupils like pinpricks of void. Now, it was while researching the 97 disappearance that I found the pattern in the purchases. Every victim had brought a different flavor of dum-dum, but when you laid out the flavors in order of disappearances, they spelled something. The first letters of each flavor started from 1952. Watermelon, apple, tropical punch, cherry, honeydew, which is really fucking disgusting. I never even knew they made those. Butterscotch, elderberry, root beer, and strawberry. Watchburs. Watchburs. You see, it meant nothing to me until I found an old map of the area. Before the highway was built, before the gas station even existed, this crossroads had another name. Watcher's Crossing. Now the Burrs part remained a mystery until I discovered what the next 4 scheduled flavors, based on the pattern, would be. And honestly, some of these I never knew existed. Blueberry, eggnog, raspberry, sour apple. The old man was collecting more than just candy. He was completing a sequence that started 70 years ago, and I had a feeling I didn't want to be around to see what happened when it was finished. I reviewed the security footage the next day, hoping to make sense of what had happened. The tape showed something I hadn't noticed during my shift. Every time the old man entered, all the digital displays in the store, the cash register, the credit card terminal, the microwave in the break room, they all flickered to show the same sequence of numbers. 222. I tried telling my manager about it, but the footage had been corrupted. It was just static and snow, like the storm had somehow gotten inside the security system. When I mentioned the old man to her, she just smiled nervously and changed the subject. A week later, I overheard her on the phone with someone discussing the incident of 97, and something about the winter they had to close the store. But the final straw came when I found an old newspaper clipping in the back break room. It was from 1997, yellow and faded, but I could still make out the headline. Local man missing after blizzard. Last seen at Pete's Gas and Go. That grainy photo showed a young man with a familiar beard, holding a dum-dum lollipop and smiling at the camera. The article was dated February 13th, same date I'd seen my visitor 28 years later. The coffee maker behind me chose that moment to start gurgling. Breaking rule number 3. The pot had run dry. I turned instinctively to check on it, just for a second. When I looked back, he was gone. The lollipop sat on the counter, unopened, with a perfect circle of frost spreading out from beneath it. I didn't break any more rules that night. The next morning, as I was leaving, I noticed something odd about the security mirror above the candy aisle. There were 4 perfect handprints pressed into its surface, as if someone had been hanging from the ceiling. They were made of frost, and they were still there even after the heat kicked on. I quit my job 2 weeks later. These days I work at a nice normal office with nice normal hours. But sometimes when the snow starts to fall, I catch myself counting how many lollipops are left in the candy dish on my desk, just to be sure. And there was one missing, and as I took a good long look around me, I see David at his cubicle, lollipop in his mouth. He gave me a smile with his bearded face and a wink, and the security cameras started to distort. Part 2. I quit that day. I walked straight out after David smiled at me. I mean, really smiled. His teeth were crystalline like icicles hanging in perfect rows. The resignation letter I dropped on my manager's desk was covered in a thin layer of frost by the time she found it. Back at Pete's, nothing had changed. The fluorescent lights still blinked out secret Morse code messages at 3 in the morning, and the security cameras caught glimpses of things that shouldn't exist, but at least I understood the rules here. At least the horrors were familiar as well. Pete himself had nodded when I first walked in, like I'd been only gone for a lunch break instead of an entire 8 months. "Hey, third shift is still yours, buddy," he said while sliding the ancient brass key across the counter that unlocks the back door. It left a trail of rust-colored powder that spelled out, "Welcome home," before a gust of wind had swept it away. Winter melted into spring, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd escaped whatever David was. The nights grew warmer, the ice cream machine stopped screaming at me when I went to clean it, and the midnight regulars, the ones with too many eyes, or perhaps not enough, seemed almost cheerful. But that's when the flowers started to grow. Not normal flowers, these bloomed only at night, their petals made of what looked like stained glass. They sprouted first in the cracks of the parking lot, then along the walls, climbing up to the roof. And each morning they'd vanish, leaving behind perfect circular holes in the concrete. Pete kept complaining about having to repave the lot every so often. "Do you know how hard it is to find a contractor who won't ask questions about spontaneously appearing holes?" he grumbled. "Hell, the last guy thought we had groundhogs. He tried to call animal control. What is it about gas stations that attract these types of things?" The new girl who came in for cigarettes every night had flowers braided in her hair, the same impossible glass blooms. Her footsteps left tiny gardens that withered and tinkled like breaking crystal with each step, and when she smiled, I could see morning dew glistening between her teeth. Now I thought I'd traded one nightmare for another, but here's the thing about working at Pete's Gas and Go. You learn to adapt. So I started keeping a spray bottle of weed killer behind the counter, right next to the silver bullets and blessed salt. Spring might have brought its own breed of strange, but at least it wasn't trying to freeze my soul away into oblivion. Besides, the glass flowers made pretty wind chimes when the void howled through them at midnight. But I've started sending out resumes again. Summer's coming, and minimum wage isn't cutting it anymore, even with Pete's generous midnight differential. The job listings are the usual suspects: data entry, office assistant, night security, normal jobs with normal benefits, and normal coworkers who probably don't have any supernatural tendencies. And just yesterday, I got a call from a promising prospect. Some tech startup downtown needs a security supervisor for their night shift. Pay is good. Too good, maybe. And the interviewer sounds almost exactly like my old manager from the accounting firm. I mean, exactly like her. When I looked up the company's address later on, it led to an empty lot behind an abandoned Blockbuster. I hesitated, but I deleted their follow-up email without opening it. Some lessons you only need to learn once. For now, I'll stick with Pete's Gas and Go, where at least the strange stuff follows a predictable pattern. The devil, you know? Besides, I noticed they're hiring at my old office again, and the position's been posted exactly 7 times since David disappeared from there, and they found a puddle of water underneath his chair. But somehow, I don't think that's a coincidence.